It's safe to say that I didn't know my grandfather. And in fact, up until recently, the only thing that I assumed we shared directly, aside from lineage, was my middle name, my Japanese name, which he gave me when I was born. My only real memory of my grandfather was from when I was about 6 or 7, right before he passed. My family and I were all out at a Japanese restaurant, and my grandfather, who had suffered a series of strokes and was not in his right mind, accidentally tried to eat one of those plastic pieces of grass that they sometimes add to a sushi platter. And my dad had to help him as he coughed and choked on it. So you can imagine why that particular image for a 7-year-old would be seared into my consciousness. But the intriguing thing about that memory is that that person at the table, an aging, ailing man, was not this person. This person was strong-willed, outspoken, and indignant about the treatment of his family during World War II. He, along with my grandmother and my father, were plucked out of their homes right here in Japantown, just up the block actually, and along with 120,000 other Japanese Americans, were sent to live in desert prisons for the duration of the war. And even though they were expected to obey this, my grandfather did not go quietly into his barrack. In fact, he made his disappointment so well known that he attracted the attention of the camp authorities, who began keeping meticulous notes on his behavior in Topaz and in Tule Lake, and in a citizen isolation center in Loop, Arizona. These notes would culminate in a 160-page file that the government kept on my grandfather, because clearly they couldn't understand or wrap their heads around why someone might possibly be oversensitive, suspicious, and aggressive. After all, they were getting 3 free meals a day. What more could you possibly want? For the past 3 years, I've been interviewing and doing oral histories with people who experienced the incarceration. And I've been trying to share these stories as widely as possible before the community gets any smaller than it already is. But in hearing these incredible first-person narratives and knowing how much people knew about their families, I understood that the gap was widening between me and my grandfather. And so I wanted to understand why, according to my father, was his dad so changed and consumed by the experience. So I dove headfirst into trying to figure out what he could have possibly said to me in his own words if he was here. Lucky for us, he was pretty straightforward about how he felt and did not mince his words when he was given a chance. He was so unwavering in his truth and his honesty, even when it got him in trouble, even when it got him interrogated and intimidated by the FBI, which it did. So in this one testimony that he had in this compilation of notes, he gave this testimony in Japanese and it was translated into English to an FBI agent. And he says that he is bitter against the United States because they took away his business license here in San Francisco, and that he wishes to go back to Japan and that he would fight in the Japanese army if he was ordered to do so. For better or worse, but probably better, that did not come to pass. And my grandparents and my dad rebuilt their lives after the war in the East Bay. Now, to add some complexity to his character, I must admit that my grandfather was no angel, and he had some hot-headed tendencies, and that perhaps the description of him being aggressive was not entirely untrue. But to the camp authorities that wrote that about him, I would ask, what would you do if you were put into a cage and your back was up against the wall? So unearthing these pieces of information about my grandfather illuminated to me why I myself seem unable or unwilling to let this history go. And that's when I had a comforting thought. I may have not known my grandfather, but I have never felt closer to him than I do at this point in my life. I've realized that love and family connection and values do not need to coexist in the same physical space or time, but that there is a continuum of love that links the generations together. I've also understood that I'm not the victim of my grandfather's story, and I need to only hold on to the things that bring me guidance or clarity as I go about doing this work. For instance, I understand that there could be a deeper sadness or regret the more I go into these stories. I will never be able to hear my grandparents' own voices, what the camp experience did to them, and how it changed their lives, and how they found the resilience to endure. But that very loss is also the catalyst for collecting all of these new stories and untold stories from the community. I want to end on this picture for a couple of reasons. This is a group of men who were in Loop together and experienced that isolation center and continued to hang out after the war was over. And I love that it showcases everything that they were deprived of in camp. Good food that they enjoyed, sake, and even their families. You can see that there's a daughter and a couple of wives. My grandmother is also in the photo. And if you can't tell who my grandfather might be in this picture, just look for the most smug-looking individual on the far right. And there he is. And at the time of this picture, my grandfather could have never predicted that a formal apology would come from the government, or that he would be called upon to tell his story again in front of the Redress Commission in San Francisco. And so, in many ways, holding on to his story for him paid off. And so, for all the ways that our relatives and our family bestow upon us and give us our values, may we always embrace and remember their convictions and resilience. Thank you.